Hello, and welcome to another episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped. I'm your host, Alana Kessler, and it is just about the July 4th holiday. And I am, I'm just, I'm just excited. I wanted to just come in here. I actually wasn't planning on recording a new episode until the holiday was over on my schedule. I've been really into schedules and just structure lately. Not that I am not like that with in other areas of my life. As you know, if you listen to the podcast regularly, I feel really strongly about routine and about structure, also about having flexible structure. But when it comes to my work, I I feel like I have a more fluid way of doing things that often leave me feeling super anxious that they're not done in time. And, um, I don't know. I just kind of was a little too on that go with the flow side of things. And I feel like it's funny because when it comes to like my spiritual practice or like my eating routine, I feel like I have much more of a handle on um, the like that fine line and that fine balance between structure and fluidity. Whereas sometimes with my work previously, before this year, I was much more in the fluid, kind of didn't really make structured plans. It was kind of like go with the flow, especially when it came to creating content like this and really just providing value and support like this to my community in the form of podcasts or in the form of social media posts, things like that. And I would find that I would constantly be thinking about it, right? I'd constantly be like thinking about what I wasn't doing. And as I'm speaking this out loud now, I realize how much of a similar thing so many of you who are listening probably and so many of my clients and students, that's what we do when it comes to eating and food. It's kind of like it's on our mind so much more when we just don't have a like a flexible routine in place. It's like too much when we have too much of a routine, and then it's not enough if we have none at all. And I feel like I got to this place with my work and my creativity, being a person who has a creative type of job, especially when it comes to this type of content, piece of it, the creation piece of it, that I was thinking about what I wasn't doing so much that it was making me anxious. And therefore, I created systems for myself and a flexible structure for myself with my team. With Cassie is, one of them, co-pilot Cassie, where we have a schedule of podcast episodes that we're going to record in advance so that it holds me accountable, but it also gives me flexibility and freedom to record the episodes at my kind of at my will within certain parameters, because obviously we need flexibility, but we need parameters. And that's one of the things I'm amazing at when it comes to food and nutrition and supporting people in that realm, but not as well with myself when it comes to this. So blessed and happy to have my amazing team supporting me in that sense. But that being said, I wasn't planning on recording anything today, but I was thinking about the fact that it's July 4th and how holidays and just in general, holidays that are rooted and anchored in celebration with food. July 4th being a barbecue. Barbecues are like parties with food, and again, like food that's flowing where there's not much structure around the food. Also, where I feel like there's a little bit of pressure, a little bit of social pressure as well. And there's also this sense of needing to do something. And I feel like I wanted to call this out because I think that this is such a trigger for so many of the women. It was a huge trigger for me, and it's such a trigger for so many of the women that I work with. in my coaching programs, in my courses, my course communities, where there's this sense that there's this energy and there's this sense, and I'm not just talking about a holiday weekend or July 4th as a holiday, but the holiday did trigger something for me. It inspired me to think about the idea of the fact that as women, we often feel like we have to be so in charge of the plan. We have to be so in charge of what's coming next. We have to always think 5 steps ahead. Um, and I feel like that is something that's not actually productive when it comes to nervous system regulation, when it comes to trying to create an environment for yourself that really supports a sense of just self acceptance, self worth, the ability to trust in the universe is going to provide for you, right? All this energetic identity that we need to be able to embody, that is really the portal and the vehicle for relaxing, for trusting ourselves, and for really calling in and attracting the type of support, the type of relationships, the type of community feel, the type of connection that we want. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because when we don't feel that way, when we don't feel the connection, when we don't feel that that we have the ability to not only give and provide and plan and think ahead, but we also can not have to do that. It's like it's not going to be a disaster if we didn't plan something. It's not going to be a disaster if we don't have the answer. And I've been having these kind of conversations with my clients, especially my one-on-one clients who I speak to more regularly, in a more intimate way. That there's this real visceral fear around not having the right answer, not having the right solution on hand for everyone, and this is a real problem. This is a real problem, and I think that it's something that we need to call out. And it's something that we need to call out in a big way, because when we subconsciously feel like that we are responsible for the right answer, the right solution, to make the plan, what happens is we're trapped in this hyper independent frame, right? This hyper independent energy, this hyper independent identity. And not only, and independence is a great thing, right? But I like to say that we want to be individuals, right? We want to be an individual with preferences, with boundaries, with standards, with point of views, but we want to be interdependent. We want to feel like there's a give and take in our relational dynamics with the people in our lives. Because if we feel like we are the ones responsible for everything, and I do think that holidays and, these kind of societal events that pop up in the world, where we feel this internal pressure to have a certain type of experience, I do think that there can be this conscious or subconscious kind of turn on, like a switch that gets turned on, where all of a sudden we kind of propel ourselves into this state where we feel like we have to be responsible for making everything happen. And I just want to normalize that it's really, really, I want to normalize that that's not the case. And I also want to reiterate and highlight how important it is that you really take it in that that's not the way. It's not the way to be. That behavior and that way of going about your life, going about how you navigate your relationships, being hyper vigilant, worried that you're not doing the right thing, you're not saying the right thing, that if you don't initiate, make the plan, nothing's going to happen or it's not going to happen right. I can't tell you how much of a trigger that is for emotional eating, for stress overeating, for mindless eating, for showing up in a way that, for showing up into the world in a way that isn't going to attract what you really are deep down yearning to feel, which is belonging, connection, and true just feeling seen and acceptance and community. Community is even like relationships, right? So it's so important. And so if you're someone listening to this and you're like, well, that's me, how can I change? The first thing that I want you to do is just acknowledge that that's you. And if you have, and you're listening to this and you're like, that's me, then congratulations. That's huge. And I really want you to just take that in and say to yourself, wow, that's a really big step that I just recognized that this is me. I remember when I realized this about myself, when I realized that I was the one always overthinking, overfunctioning, always feeling like I had to make sure that I said thank you, that I said the right thing, that I made sure the other person felt appreciated all the time, and just constantly just overthinking, overfunctioning. I remember when I realized that I was doing that and how painful that was and how exhausting that was and how much that made my nervous system so dysregulated. It made me feel in chaos all the time. It created inflammation in my body. It interrupted my sleep. I constantly felt bloated, right? Like there was all these physical symptoms I was having. And I remember when I started to, this is like 7 years ago, because 7 years ago is when I really started to do this type of deep inner work, right? Like I lost weight 12 years ago. So, I healed my emotional eating. I got my nutrition and weight in a really good place 12 years ago. But the deep inner identity work that has kept me at this place, I would say, really started 8 years ago. And I remember the first time that I really just felt in my soul that I was this woman that felt responsible for everybody, everyone's feelings, everyone's emotions. If I didn't make it happen, it wasn't going to happen. I remember when I realized that I was that woman and I had done so much, of my own inner work, that I was able to hold the space for that part of myself. I was able to hold the space for that part of myself that I knew my higher self knew that wasn't okay and that wasn't necessary. I didn't know another way, but I also knew that wasn't the way. And so it created this gap and this space where I was like, whoa, okay, that's right. And I trusted that. I knew in my bones that that wasn't the way. Whereas maybe like the 5 years before, I was still operating from this place of overfunctioning. And the body is really resilient. So for a really long time, I don't think it was necessarily affecting me on on a more subtle layer, a more subtle level, in the sense where it didn't affect my life. Like I was still happy with everything, right? Like I felt good in my life and I was feeling good, and then I wasn't feeling good anymore. And that's when I realized that there was more than just the body part. There's more than just like getting to a good weight that's going to make me happy. and that I really needed to do this deep inner work of repatterning and reprogramming my belief system and my trust in other people to take care of me. And that meant, delegating, and not from a place of power, right? So when we think of delegation, we think of work, and it's like you have more power, and so I'm going to delegate to you because you're my underling. I'm talking about delegating in the sense where you can energetically delegate, and you can delegate. This would be the second thing. So you notice, right? The first thing is you notice that this is you, right? And you honor that. And as I was saying, when I honored that for myself, I cried for days. And it was so therapeutic. I was like bawling. I cried and cried. Sometimes it would come out of nowhere. I was living in Manhattan and I would be walking down the street listening to something, a podcast or whatever, and I would cry. I remember I had jury duty. And I was just sitting in the middle of jury duty thinking about how this wound of thinking that I had this feminine wound, that I would call it. I called it that. This feminine wound of not being able to receive, not being able to just sit back and trust that other people have it handled, and just being that is so hard. Living like that is so hard and exhausting and lonely. And I cried. I hysterically cried. I had to walk out of jury duty because I was crying so much. And that happened to me for a couple weeks. And then I started to heal, right? I started to heal. I started to learn the skills of being a receiver in a relationship. And this is something I'm so passionate about, because being the receiver in a relationship is not just sitting back and fingers crossed hoping people are going to do things. It's actually expressing yourself in a certain way and letting people in to who you are, what you want, what you need in a certain way. And then trusting that they're going to provide that for you. And also suggesting collaborating in certain ways with people. Because that is how we feel. That is how we feel like we're participating in relationship, in life, in community, right? It's not just someone does something for me and I receive it. There's a give and take on so many layers when it comes to relationships and when it comes to being interdependent. And when you start to surf through your life that way, where you really know how to trust in first where you really realize that it's not your job to provide an amazing emotional experience for everybody, and that it's a collaborative effort where everybody feels like it's a good experience, and that you could stop over functioning, and you can stop overdoing, you can stop over planning, and you can stop being the person that's so hyper independent, and you can really build this solid support system. When you feel that way, it's just there's nothing better. And this goes for so many different areas of life. And the core reason why we do go into that planning over functioning is because we don't trust that if we let go of the reins, somebody will be there to pick us up and carry us and shepherd us through as well. But the only way to have that happen is to create the space for it to happen. That means that you have to stop doing that. Distance yourself from people that maybe make you feel like you have to do that. learn how to be with yourself in those feelings of, in those feelings of discomfort where maybe as you're moving from this overfunctioning identity to this more receiving identity, and then where you're in an identity where you flow between both, where you not overfunction, but you are the one that's taking the lead, and you also can be the one that's receiving in different areas. As you're almost shape shifting your identity into this, you have to hold space for your own self. That's kind of what I was telling you I did for a while. And that's how you grow the capacity. Because when you hold the space for your own self, you can start to be less reactive. You could start to feel less responsible. You could start to be detached from whether or not something is going to happen or something's not going to happen. And then you can start to really build the skills of creating that identity where you can both receive support and you can provide support and experience for other people. And once you master this skill, and this is a skill, and so I want to just let you know this is something you have to work on. This is something that can create emotional discomfort. This is something that, this is a skill that will test the edges of your nervous system and might actually dysregulate your nervous system in the beginning because it's so different from how you operate usually, which is why it is really nice to have support from someone who's been there, which is why in all my programs I offer this, this kind of support where you have the community support, you have the coaching support, because that you heal interpersonal dynamics in interpersonal dynamics. You can't heal in interpersonal dynamics by yourself. You can understand it. You can get to the root of it. You can mourn it. You can have grief. You can uncover it, but you can't heal it. You have to heal it in a dynamic that's interpersonal so you can reprogram and repattern it. And that's why it's so important to get to this place with your identity where you start to learn how to trust receiving support and learn how to be somebody who can get the support you need because you know what that is for you. And you know how to express it, you know how to communicate it, and you know how to be a collaborator within it. Okay? So that is all I have for you today on this pop-up episode of Emotional Eating Unwrapped. So thank you so much for joining me. Don't forget to join me again next week with another new episode about emotional eating so you can fall in love with eating, start losing weight, keep it off with sustainable strategies and lasting change. If you found this episode insightful, please subscribe, leave a review on Apple or Spotify, watch on YouTube, subscribe and like there, share it with those who may benefit from this empowering knowledge. I also have lots of free resources on my website to support you on your journey to loving food and losing weight. Just go to www.bewellbyak.com. And until next time, I'm Alana, and thank you for listening to Emotional Eating Unwrapped.